Welcome, everybody. How are you feeling today? Sorry I'm a little fashionably late, but we're here. It's all right? Thank you, thank you. I'm supported by my women. Thank you so much. I appreciate that. So happy to see you all, ladies. Let's do a brief intro before we start this conversation, which I know will be riveting. So Magatte Wade, you were born in Senegal, educated in France, and started her entrepreneurial career in the US. Her first company, Adina World Beverages, was based on indigenous Senegalese beverage recipes, and you became one of the most widely distributed US brands started by an African entrepreneur. Congratulations. And to your right is Dr. Precious Motsepe. She's a Johannesburg-based businesswoman, and she's also chairperson of African Fashion International, one of the leading fashion shows on the continent. AFI's goal is to promote and develop South African and African fashion and to bring it into the mainstream. You're doing a phenomenal job. Thank you so much for being here. And Ms. Taiye Selasi, so good to see you again. She is the embodiment of an Afropolitan, not only because she is, but she coined the term, so it's pretty much hers, right? And she was born in London to a Nigerian mother and a Ghanaian father, and she's a writer and a photographer, and she's also the author of the New York Times bestseller, Ghana Must Go. So ladies, please, thank you so much. Welcome to the stage. And let's get the party started. So, the panel has been named Africa's Turn. Can you each tell me why you think that should be the case and why now? We'll start with you. Magatte, you want to start?
I'm like, do you want to start?
Okay, well, who wants to start?
Do you want to start?
I'll start.
Hi, go for it.
I think that it's a wonderful name, but I think it could have always been the case. I think it's always been Africa's turn, but not everyone has been paying attention. And I suspect that right now, certainly in the cultural space, we are seeing a bit of a renaissance in terms of fashion, film, literature, design,
we'll get to that.
in the green room, it was like, I love your necklace, I love your necklace, I love your shoes, I love your shoes. And this is sort of how it goes in most of my conversations around the world. But behind that renewed cultural vigor, is, I think, a very meaningful shift, not only in the type and the amount of investment flowing into the continent, but also the consciousness of those who are using that capital to change the way daily lives are lived by African people, and my heart is always with young people as a consequence. So I think that we're at a wonderful moment. It makes me so happy to sit there and think, in this year alone, I'll get to see half of a yellow sun on screen, and then the Fela Kuti biopic was just greenlit, and there's just this embarrassment of riches and literature, and that is all wonderful, and I think it deserves all the attention that it can get and that it hasn't been getting for all this time. Alongside that, no less important, but deserving of as much attention, I think, is what is happening also with young people and in the socioeconomic space.
Dr. Motsepe, why do you think it's Africa's turn?
Well, for a lot of reasons, and some of which have already been mentioned. But if you think back, you had big media companies, magazines that talked of Africa as the lost continent.
Mm-hmm. The dark continent.
The dark
yes.
continent. And now, if you look at the same magazines, you see Africa's billionaires.
Mm-hmm.
They're talking about the rising middle class. You're talking about a continent whose population is growing and is young. So there's also the positivity of seeing how the economies on the continent are doing so well. They're flourishing. If you think about it, 7 of the fastest growing economies globally are all in Africa. So everything, I think, culturally, in terms of the economy, in terms of the human resources, is well aligned. And it's now the turn of African people to make use of those opportunities so we actually move forward.
And that we don't squander them. Magatte, your turn, weigh in. Why is it Africa's turn?
For me, I like to look at the world, at least from my point of view, I like to look at the world from one thing I've always been very interested in is culture. And why is it that a country like America was such a powerful country? And at the same time, why is it that a lot of people, why is it that a lot of African people, and as a matter of fact, why is it that it took so long for Africa to even be talked about in these terms today? And so as I spent more time looking into that, what I found is that everything kept pointing me to the power of consumer brands. So I know that very few people pay attention to these things, but when you look at the top 1,000 global consumer brands in the world, none of them is African. Most of them are American, and then you have the French brands, and then you have some some other European brands, especially German usually, and Italian. So to me, I correlate the two very much. How big and how embraced is a culture by the rest of the world, I correlate that to really what can happen into those countries. So in any case, when I look at the top global brands in the world and none is African, what it tells me is Africa doesn't exist. Because if I don't wear you, if I don't drink you, if I don't shower, bathe with you, I don't really know you. Especially if everything I think I know of you is so negative. So it's very important for me then that we try and focus on African brands. And when you say, okay, we have to focus on African brands, then why is it that today is the turn for Africa? It's because in the 21st century, as I sit here in front of you, what we have in this world, there again, many people don't pay attention, but it's what we call the cultural creative demographic. Who has ever heard of that term? Only 1, 2 people in this room, 3. But you see how we don't pay attention to that. So who are the cultural creative demographic? They're the people who shop at Whole Foods. These are the people for whom ethics is the most important thing when they consider buying something. And these are the consumers that today, if you put in front of them a brand from L'Oreal or a brand from, like Estée Lauder or anyone, they usually say no. They say, I want a Tiosan brand, my company, for example. What is there for them? The power and the belief that our elders have known so much for so long. These are people who genuinely love us and respect us.
Well, speaking of your brand, let's speak about entrepreneurship, because I believe that if the continent is truly going to take the stage and have it, again, be Africa's turn, the women have to be empowered. Not feel empowered, but actually be empowered. And so much of that comes from economic self-determination. Speak to me about why it was important for you, Magatte, to be your own boss, and what hurdles did you encounter trying to do business on the continent as a woman?
You see, one of the biggest problems that I have is that I look too young for my own good. Blame it on my products. But in Africa, when you're a woman, when you're young...
People pay for that problem, Magatte. You know that.
Okay, so then bite your son. That's the only advertising I'll do. I'm just kidding. But anyways, I look too young for my own good. I'm a woman, and I also don't tend to follow the rules. You see, being African, we all know that. It's respect for the elders, which I truly love from our continent. But the flip side of that is that you don't allow people to really use their minds critically and independently.
You can't question authority.
Right.
It's very much the same case in Asian cultures as well.
Absolutely.
Deference is key.
Absolutely. Mm-hmm. So for me, it was, I was very fortunate to have been raised mainly by my grandmother in my very formative years, and my grandmother has told me something very simple. She said, no one is better than you. No one. If anything, you'll be better than most people. So to me, that's really what carried me through life. And it is important that I am my own person, I am my own boss. I don't do everything right, far from it. But my mistakes are my mistakes, and you're gonna respect me for that.
Dr. Motsepe, would you like to weigh in as well? The importance of economic self-determination on the continent for women.
That's correct. As you have read, my background is I studied as a medical doctor. I trained as a doctor. I actually grew up in that notorious township called Soweto in South Africa. Most of you know of it with the struggle during apartheid years in South Africa. And I managed to get into one of the universities that in South Africa, for those of you who don't know apartheid, it was a system where black people and white people were kept separately. So we went to different schools, and it was a really terrible system that kept one race down, oppressed and poor, and the other one, having access to economic opportunities and education. So all that has changed in South Africa, and it's good. But when I went to university, I had to apply to the Minister of Health to get into a white university. That was, one of the best universities in our country, and black people did not have access to it. So I managed to study at that university, and the strange thing is my son now studies at the same university, and because it's now open. So as a doctor...
Now that's progress.
That's nice,
it is
right?
huge progress. It is huge progress on the backs of women and men in South Africa who fought against apartheid. So, and I want to bring in the role that women played to bring down apartheid. About 20 years ago, a group of women, without cell phones, without no electricity, no
iPads,
roads, nothing like that, came together, and they decided to march to our headquarters, your Washington, to protest against black people having to carry pass laws. And that was the strength of women that actually brought down that system. So it was women who stood up and decided enough is enough. That was the power of women in changing apartheid in South Africa. So as a doctor, I practiced women's health. I was passionate about helping women, because I felt that as a woman, I was able to relate better to a female doctor. And therefore, the services that I offered women, they also appreciated because they understood, they knew that I can understand where they come from. But in my practice, I also noticed that a lot of women were trapped in the cycle of poverty. So poverty leads to disease, and disease leads to poverty. You know what it is like when you have 7 children, you don't have a job, your husband might be working as a migrant laborer, and so you're the last person to look after yourself. So you never actually take any money to look after yourself. So my work at that time was about helping women, empowering women to look after themselves, because let's face it, without your health, you've got nothing. Our wealth is in ourselves. We are our biggest asset. As your health is very important. But in realizing that women economic empowerment was very, very important, I then moved into fashion, which was a very strange place to move into. But why did I move into fashion? Exactly because of what you said. Women are the biggest consumers of fashion. Women are employed in the fashion industry as seamstresses. They work in factories. There's a lot of women who work as fashion designers. So for me, it was about supporting the women in the industry and making sure that they receive that economic muscle to be able to feed their children, take them to school, and also look after themselves. So my work has really been around empowerment of women, either be it in health or in the economic space.
Taiye, I want you to jump in here because we've spoken about how important it is for women on the continent to own their own businesses. But how important is it for women to own their own stories? Because, as we all know, there's an image about the continent that's perpetuated by the West, and it's not been favorable for decades.
You don't think so?
I don't think so.
You didn't like Heart of Darkness?
Yeah, I didn't. No. Conrad, not a favorite
so
of mine.
I love what you say about consumer brands, because I think of it also in terms of cultural brands. I think that film, music, literature, and fashion as a sort of quartet can change the perception of a place as much as foreign policy can. When you were speaking, I was reminded of a dinner I went to. Madeleine Albright convened a dinner in Washington, D.C. with policymakers and thinkers to talk about the future of Africa. And for some strange reason, they thought they should have a writer at the table. I came a bit late.
Don't be modest.
I came a bit late, as Nigerians are wont. And so I missed the first part of the dinner when everybody was saying in what beleaguered African state he or she had worked. So they were going around like, I worked, and there was political chaos and religious disarray. And then I sat down and I said, well, where I live, there's just been a long, drawn out change of religious power. There's no government. And they're like, oh, where are you from? And I was like, oh, I live in Rome, in Italy, where we didn't have a pope or a president for a very long time. However, we all laughed, but then we started talking about what you're saying. Why is it that though I live in probably one of the most politically corrupt nations on the face of the earth, we don't associate Italy with the same things we always associate this monolithic illusion of Africa with? And I'd never thought about it quite like this, but I believe that the consumer brands, as well as the cultural products, have so much to do with that. Those of us who hear about scandals and the Vatican and Berlusconi, we hear it and we think, but this is the country that gave us suede loafers and Italian cinema and Bialetti and coffee. How corrupt can it be? And I assure you, very. But we don't perceive it that way. And living in Italy and comparing the perception of Italy in the world to the perception of the 55 states on the African continent has taught me a huge lesson, not only about consumer brands, but also about cultural ones. And so that's a long introduction to say that I think that as we begin to see more films made by African filmmakers, more novels written by African novelists, be they male or female, I should say, the more we'll come to understand the fundamental humanity as well as the unique cultural contribution of the citizens of these 55 states, each one hugely different from the next.
Taiye, I have to ask you about the term Afropolitan.
Do you have to?
I have to, because I don't know this story. I know you, but I don't know this story. So how did you come up with the term? Did you realize it would become a part of the international lexicon? And do you get a royalty check every time it's used?
My mom certainly asks for one, but I was leaving.
And for those who don't know what an Afropolitan is, can you give us the quick Webster's Dictionary definition?
Absolutely. I hope it goes into Webster's Dictionary one day. I was leaving grad school. I had done a master's in international relations, trying to be very serious like African immigrants do. And I was asked to write an article for the Africa issue of a magazine, and I thought that I would write about oil or such like. And I thought, no, I want to do something a bit different. And so I wrote an essay, short, about my trouble answering the very simple question, where are you from? And we just had this funny exercise in the back where I'd say, well, hi, Precious, where are you from? And then you say, South Africa, where are you from? And I'm like, I was born in London, but I grew up in the States, and my father's from Ghana, but he lives in Saudi Arabia, and my mother's Nigerian and a little bit Scottish, but she lives in Ghana, and I live in Rome, and then it's like, no, you're confused.
It's a little convoluted.
It's a little convoluted. And I started to realize that a number of young people, but not just young people, who had this sort of family background were in the same boat. You gave a very similar answer. I was born in Senegal, but then I was in Germany, and then I was in France, and now I'm between New York and Senegal, and I hear it all the time amongst my cousins and my friends and such like. And so I wrote this essay considering that there was an experience, more so than a label or a demographic, but just an experience that had given rise in my lifetime to a very particular way of thinking about identity, a very flexible way of thinking about identity that wasn't, and this was important for me, any less valid or any less authentic than the identity of those who have slightly more mono-local senses of self. So that's why I wrote that essay in 2005, and I think exactly 6 people read it. And
no, a lot of people read it.
In 2005, 6 people. In
2005.
2007, a wonderful gallery in South Africa asked if they could print it in their catalog, the Michael Stevenson Gallery in Cape Town. I said, okay. They said, I'll pay you, like $6.50. I was like, fantastic. And then they
once you get paid, you're a real writer.
You're a professional writer.
Official.
And they ran it, and it ended up in a newspaper in Nairobi. And I got a wonderful email this was in the days before people understood how to use BCC, so it was like 19,000 email addresses, and at the bottom, someone said, this guy basically described me. And I clicked on the link, and it was my essay. And it's funny, I wasn't upset that it was my essay, but that someone assumed that I was a man. It was a really interesting moment. I'm like, this guy. And from there, it went around, and it turned out, as I had suspected, that there were a number of people, not just Africans, but a number of people, Donna included, who live in our world, in our time. And it's not confusing for people to think of a European having this type of background, an American having this type of background, but it's harder for them to grasp that Africans do as well. And so that's where the term came from.
Magatte, you're actually one of the entrepreneurs who's managed to sell your products abroad. Adina World Beverages is sold in Whole Foods. Wow. How did you make that a reality, and what advice do you have for African entrepreneurs who are trying to make their brands global?
Adina was my first company. Now I'm focusing mainly on Tiosan, my skincare company. But
and you walked away from that company, which that was going to be my follow-up question, but we'll talk about that.
I will.
And you walked away from it for moral reasons, so I also want to speak with you about that.
We'll do.
We'll get there.
And before I answer your question, I just wanted to say that there is one designer in the room whose clothes I cannot wait to try, and those are of Sophie Nziga-Si from Senegal. I'm like, we need to talk, because I've been seeing her stuff and I really want it. So she'll be my African. So when it comes to African brands selling in the US, you know, I like to tell people, when I do something, I like to look at who is the top in my industry, and that becomes my standard to beat. And so when I started my beverage company, the leaders in the industry were companies like Odwalla and companies like Naked Juice, companies like that, who were in the same league and dealing with the same customer base. So for me, when I start a company, I don't want to think of myself any longer as a woman or as an African or as anything. I am going to be the very best that I can be. If not, I'll go home. So that's what I do. I try to find what are those standards, and that's what I try to beat. And that's when you do that, then things naturally do come. You know, I remember when we shipped our first container of hibiscus, because the flagship drink for Adina was the hibiscus drink, my traditional drink from Senegal. So you see, when you were talking about brands and culture, to me, brands are only that. Brands basically build any culture that you want to build. Some of them are based on real culture, some of them are completely made up. My favorite story example is telling people, you know, you guys all know about Santa Claus. A complete pure fabrication. You know that little guy with his outfit and everything? All of that, the outfit and all of that, is a pure fabrication from Coca-Cola. From Coca-Cola, you know Santa Claus? Santa Claus, Santa Claus.
Oh, okay.
My accent, I'm sorry.
I was like, Santa Claus?
My accent, I'm sorry.
Okay, it's okay.
So
Santa Claus.
Thank you.
Gotcha.
Thank you.
Yeah.
So pure fabrication by Coca-Cola. And around the world...
Santa's not real?
So anyway, so when I go back, when we first shipped our first container of hibiscus drink, because again, I wanted to share that part of my story with people, and the best way for me to do that was to include it in something that's going to go straight in your belly and make you look good and make you feel good. So when that thing came, the factory called. At some point, we had a huge problem because they broke very expensive pieces of equipment. What was a problem? We had, in these bags of hibiscus, they found rocks. They found things that I was just like, when they called me with that story, I was about to die. Because this is definitely not my standard. And we had worked so hard, you wouldn't imagine all the investors that we had lined up for Adina. And one of them in the room, her name is Yvette, she's way in the back. But people who had rallied and invested first 1 million, then 2 million, then 5, and it just never ended. And I was flying back and forth home to create a supply chain that did not exist. When I started with a hibiscus was dying. Because back home, they felt that if you made it, you show your new status by drinking Western brands. That's the sad truth that we're dealing with in most parts of Africa. So here I am, working the very best that I can work, and I told them what my market was. I had showed these women what my competition was. These are people who make no mistake. So we cannot make any mistake. And no one is going to give us passes just because we're these poor little Africans trying to make it. I don't want to succeed because you have pity for me trying to make it. I want to succeed because I'm giving you the very best and something you've never had before, and I'm exciting to you, and this is wonderful for you.
All right, Magatte, really quickly, they're telling me that we only have time for maybe 1 or 2 questions, and then we have to end our party. So who wants to ask 1 or 2 questions really quickly?
And so we have partners in Africa, and they're powerful women who are bringing microfinance and education and healthcare. And we are constantly struggling with the US Congress, administration, though they're better, but the public on this negative image of Africa as the victims. And it does come from the fact that Americans think about Africa, they think about we're giving them money. Now sometimes it goes back to how we propped up dictators and old World Bank money. And the idea now is they want to help, but they also see it as they're victims. We're helping them. So your stories are so important. So what can you tell people? What can we tell people when they hear Africa and they go, oh, we're just giving them money. They're the victims. We're tired of that.
Yeah. Who wants to take that question?
Just from our point of view as representing fashion designers, I can tell you that a lot of people on the continent don't want aid. They want trade. Open those trade barriers and you've really helped them. No aid, trade. And trade, aid to trade. That's what we need.
And to build up on that, I like to play with people in New York and telling them that it used to be cool to do philanthropy for Africa. But I like to say that cool has moved. It's no longer cool to do philanthropy in Africa. If you really want to be cool nowadays in New York, I'm going to tell you, you need to talk at your little fancy dinner parties about investment in Africa. So what is the latest investment you made rather than the latest philanthropy that you made?
Okay, next question. Trade, not aid. You know what to say at your next cocktail party.
There's none of the cool parties anymore.
Hi, my name is Farai Kundan. I write with Forbes. Hi, Lola. Hello, Dr. Precious. Good to see you. Dr. Precious Motsepe mentioned that there's about 1 billion people in the continent of Africa, and Magatte talks about consumer products being something that will really lead the way in Africa's turn. My question to you is, what are the immediate steps that we should take from this group here that would help in Africa's turn in putting Africa on the map and really turning Africa around?
Taiye, do you want to take that?
I don't. It's a very small thing, but whenever I'm speaking to anyone, I always say, stop using that phrase, Africa. You know, if you invest in 4 countries, if you invest in Tanzania, Kenya, South Africa, and Botswana, say that. If you got your bracelet in Senegal, say you got your bracelet in Senegal. If you went to Egypt, say you went to Egypt. Don't say I went to Africa. This is a brand. This beleaguered, victimized Africa. It is a brand. It's not one we love, but it's definitely one we sell in this country. And so I think the first thing that you can do is to stop using that term, unless you're talking about the entire continent. But if you are, then you have to really ask yourself, what are the things that are realistically going to affect that many people living under such diverse conditions? And if the more specific you can be in your thinking, the more, maybe I'm a writer, so my tendency is always to be as impeccable as I can with my language, but the more specific you can be in your thinking and in your language, the more you can shift the conversations that you're having, and the more you can talk about investment in this brand in Senegal, or investment in fashion designers from these places, and you can shine a light on the diversity and on the uniqueness and the wonderfulness of these places, these people, and these products. But if we all continue along these discursive lines, we never move forward. Does that make sense?
Okay, ladies, they're telling me I have to wrap up. Final thoughts on Africa's turn, each of you very quickly, and then we have to go. We have to wrap up, but final thoughts on Africa's turn.
I'm going to say it again, criticize by creating.
That's brilliant. Yeah. By creating. Yeah.
Okay.
From me, it's really whatever you think you can do or whatever you want to do, begin it. You've got to start doing things. Begin, because in starting, you create positive energy. Starting things gives it's boldness, and boldness has genius in it. It has it's motivating and it's very powerful. So I'd like to urge each one of you, whatever it is that you think you can do, start it. Don't wait for the hour. The hour's now.
Actually, I'm going to go with what your grandmother said, because this, as soon as you said it, it began resonating in my heart and in my mind, which is that no one is better than you.
Well, ladies, thank you so much for being here. I hope you enjoyed the conversation as much as I did, and I hope you all had a wonderful afternoon as well. I'm sure you'll be around for any follow-up questions, but we've got to go. So thank you so much for being here.